Suspensions in the NBA can range from anywhere between 1 game to, well, forever. But I guess that defeats the definition of suspension, which means temporary. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to be talking about any players or owners who've been permanently banned, due to what they said or due to drugs or anything like that. Although I will cover some of those drug-related suspensions later in this video. For now, we're going to take a look at the longest non-drug-related suspensions in NBA history. And what was the aftermath of those suspensions for the players themselves and for their teams? Some of these guys you might recognize, but others probably not. In this video, we're going to take a look at everything. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and without further ado, let's get started. But before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to Honey for sponsoring this video. Honey is a free browser extension that automatically finds the best promo codes whenever you shop online. You'll get the best deals and coupons from over 20,000 websites, including Amazon, eBay, Target, Best Buy, and more. I've used Honey multiple times before to buy some electronics on Amazon. In the upcoming holiday season, I've been looking to buy a new toaster oven. Honey found me a discount code which I used to get $44 off from Best Buy. It's completely free to use and so easy to install, it just takes 2 clicks. Just go to my link, joinhoney.com/AndyHoops to get started. First, let's get the longest suspension out of the way. November of 2004, Metta World Peace, formerly known as Ron Artest, got suspended for the rest of the 2004-05 season. He ended up missing a total of 86 games, which included 73 regular season games plus 13 playoff games. This 86-game suspension was the longest in the history of the NBA, if you don't consider players who were permanently banned. If you're an NBA fan, you probably know what happened with Ron Artest. In a game between the Pacers and Pistons early in that season, a fan in the crowd threw a cup of beer at Artest, and it landed on his chest. Artest then proceeded to go up to the stands and throw hands at the fan. He mistaken the person who threw the cup and hit somebody else instead. 2 other Pacer players, Jermaine O'Neal and Steven Jackson, also got involved in the brawl, and they both got pretty long suspensions too. O'Neal originally got 25 games, but it got reduced to 15, and Steven Jackson got 30 games. While most people talk about the Malice at the Palace as a horrible event, we don't talk much about how good that Pacers team was, and the impact that it had on the entire organization. It was arguably the best team of the Artest and O'Neal era, and also the last season of Reggie Miller's career. Even before the season started, they were the favorites to make it to the NBA Finals, but ultimately, the brawl and all these suspensions hampered them way too much. Especially missing Artest, who at the time just came off of winning Defensive Player of the Year the previous season. He was at the peak of his career, and he got suspended for basically the entire season. Shortly after Artest returned, he got traded. So this event essentially killed a future dynasty, as this Pacers team was legit. They had a bright future ahead of them, and it just didn't work out. The next suspension we'll talk about lasted 68 games. It was Latrell Sprewell. Back in 1997, Latrell Sprewell was on his way to becoming a superstar. In the previous year, he averaged over 24-6, and while the Golden State Warriors were still missing the playoffs and not doing too well as a team, Sprewell was one of the few bright spots they had. What happened was, during practice, Sprewell got into an argument with Warriors head coach PJ Carlesimo. Actually, it wasn't much of an argument. Carlesimo criticized Sprewell's passing, and then Sprewell exploded and lashed out his anger towards him, choking him and then punching him. Back then, it was a big surprise to many because Sprewell's reputation around the league was different. He was seen as a quiet, chill guy who never spoke much to begin with. The general audience was surprised that he could act this way. However, in an article back in 1997, there was apparently a different side to Sprewell. It stated, quote, "Although the 6'5", 190-pound Sprewell is described as quiet by many of his teammates and ex-coaches, the incident with Carlesimo is not the first time his temper has exploded." Ronnie Cycli, Sprewell's former Warriors teammate who plays for the Orlando Magic, says Sprewell, quote, "always seemed to have this hatred inside him. Even though he never got physical with the coaching staff before, I had seen him do it to other players in practice. Sprewell has had at least 2 fights with teammates during practice, one with Byron Houston and the other with Jerome Kersey, both of whom outweighed him and both of whom are now ex-Warriors. The scuffle with the muscular Houston in 1993 was surprising because he was about 50 pounds heavier than Sprewell, and his face and physique resembled Mike Tyson's. No one messed with Houston, says Don Nelson, former coach of the Warriors. But one day in practice, Spree punched Byron 3 times before Byron knew what was up. Everyone was stunned. He snapped. Essentially, what happened was Sprewell lost his temper, which turned out to be something he has done multiple times before. Just not many people knew about it. The aftermath of this event was quite brutal. Sprewell would miss 68 games, then get traded to the New York Knicks. The Warriors basically had to revamp their entire team and move forward without their young star, and it took a long time for them to rebuild. While Sprewell did have a very successful run with the Knicks and rebuilt himself into a star, his reputation was never the same again. Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton. Both would be suspended on January 27, 2010 for the rest of the season. Arenas would miss 50 games, but Crittenton got waived shortly after the suspension anyway, and he never played in the NBA again. The story here is also pretty well known. They both pulled a gun on each other in the locker room over disputes with some gambling debts. While Crittenton was never a good player in the NBA to begin with, Arenas was. However, at this point, even before the gun incident, Arenas' career was already going downhill. With multiple knee surgeries after 2007, he was never the same again. This incident was just the cherry on top that killed his career for good. It also made his contract, which he signed in 2008 for 6 years, $111 million, arguably the worst contract in NBA history, because he only played a total of 121 games after that, most of which were not impactful as he was no longer a star, and barely even a rotation player. Gilbert's life would end up better than Crittenton's though, as Crittenton would get sent to jail for killing somebody. Kermit Washington. In 1977, in a heated matchup between the Houston Rockets and LA Lakers, a fight broke out. Although he didn't start the altercation, during it, Washington launched a massive punch right at Rudy Tomjanovich. Tomjanovich suffered a fractured skull, a broken jaw, a broken nose, and, quote, leakage of spinal fluid. Yeesh. He needed surgery to reconstruct his face, and doctors said that he nearly died from the punch. From a basketball standpoint, the aftermath for both Washington and Tomjanovich was pretty bad, as you can imagine. Before that, Tomjanovich was a perennial all-star, a 20 points per game scorer. But after he recovered and came back, he was a shell of his former self. He played just 3 more seasons in the NBA before retiring at just 32 years old. As for Washington, he got suspended for 26 games, and looking back on that, that's actually not that many games considering what he did. Afterwards, everyone hated Washington. In an article from 1985, it described what happened afterwards. Quote, shortly after he got reinstated by the NBA, he was traded to Boston, where he knew no one. Loneliness, heckling, and threats accompanied him for the rest of the 1977-78 season, and into the future. Kermit would eventually become an all-star in 1980, but the animosity towards him continued for the rest of his career. On a side note, the Rockets also filed a $2 million lawsuit against the Lakers for, quote, the loss of Tomjanovich's services. One of the few times in NBA history where an injury was so bad that a team filed a lawsuit against the team who was responsible. Those were the major suspensions that were non-drug related. However, the majority of them are drug-related. The first wave of drug-related suspensions happened in the 1980s, when hard drugs like cocaine were rampant across the league. The NBA really wanted to clean up its image, so they started to enforce harsher punishments. As a result, many players got suspended or permanently banned. Players who've been permanently banned include John Drew, Chris Washburn, Richard Dumas, who got banned and then reinstated several times but then got banned again, and also Roy Tarpley. Other players who've been banned initially but then reinstated successfully include Michael Ray Richardson, Mitchell Wiggins, the father of Andrew Wiggins, and Lewis Lloyd. Both of them played for the Rockets, and their suspensions were part of the reason why the Rockets struggled for most of Hakeem Olajuwon's prime. And also Birdman, who got suspended for 2 years but then got reinstated. Also, let's not forget O.J. Mayo or Tyreek Evans. Both of them were the most recent players to get permanently banned, but they have a chance to get reinstated in the foreseeable future. But will they actually get reinstated? I'm not sure. Even if we assume that they don't get blackballed, players who've been reinstated in the past do not have a good track record of returning back to form. It's very likely for both of these guys, their careers are over. Besides that, in the past, back in the 1950s, 1960s, there were a couple of NBA players suspended for gambling or point shaving, most of which were from the CCNY point shaving scandal back in 1950. That scandal involved 7 different colleges. In recent times, we've seen the rise of more and more players using performance-enhancing drugs. The NBA has been cracking down, so we've seen more players getting suspended, usually for around 20 games or so. Overall, there haven't been too many ridiculous suspensions in recent NBA history. Many of them have been related to drugs that the NBA banned, like some PEDs or diuretics, but the ones that aren't, you don't see many of them. I doubt we'll ever see another guy go up into the stands and start throwing punches at the crowd, as security measures have improved since then. All in all, suspensions, especially the longer ones, are definitely not good. In most of these cases, they really damage a person's reputation and their overall basketball career. While it's easy to say that if a young player gets suspended, they'll bounce back pretty easily. However, we have seen young players get suspended before and it wasn't the same. Maybe they didn't fall off completely, but if you were to compare their stats before and after their suspensions, you'd definitely see a difference. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the video. Let me know your thoughts on NBA suspensions in general, and what do you think of these suspensions in the video? Which ones do you think were a bit too harsh, or maybe not harsh enough? Let me know in the comments. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.